Senator McConnell, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be with you.
We're glad to have you here talking about First Amendment issues and free speech issues. I want to start off by asking what I call the $1 million question, or maybe the $10 million question, which is you have an average American who picks up a newspaper one day and sees some wealthy person has put up $10 million, $20 million, whatever it is, to do political ad buys and the like, and they say, huh, you know, I can't do that. Why can this person have that kind of influence over the political system and I can't? That doesn't seem fair. I think that's the instinct that motivates some people. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, this is not an issue about fairness. This is an issue about free speech. And the Supreme Court has made it quite clear and never really deviated from this principle that the government doesn't have the power under the First Amendment to tell people how much they can speak. And of course, speech in a country of 300 million people means you also need to have the ability to amplify your voice. And there's no question that people who choose to spend their own money, whether on their own campaign or advocating causes that they believe in, arguably have an advantage. But of course, the rest of us can pool our resources in groups and frequently do, everything from the AARP to the NRA, so that our voices can be amplified. Essentially what's at stake here is defending the principle that the government doesn't get to decide who gets to speak and who doesn't, that there's no way to level speech. It's impermissible under the First Amendment. So I think we shouldn't be frightened about it. It's also important to remember that there are rich liberals too. And there have been plenty of people out there trying, wealthy liberals trying to influence the course of events over the years. Now there seem to be some concerned conservatives trying to do the same thing. It's all producing a marketplace of ideas, which we shouldn't be afraid of. But the administration, of course, would like to pick winners and losers. It would like to silence its critics to enhance the voices of its friends.
And how do you see them doing that?
Well, they're using the various agencies of the government, the SEC, the FCC, even the IRS, to try to go after people who are supporting causes with which the administration disagrees. In other words, to try to use the power.
Can you give an example of that? You say they're going after what?
Well, I'll give you one from the Obama campaign itself. They went after a millionaire in Minnesota who contributed to Mitt Romney's super PAC, went through his divorce records, tried to destroy his business. It's really quite Nixonian. They have an enemies list, and they want to use not only the campaign to go after these perceived enemies, but the agencies of the federal government as well. And to give you an indication of how far they're willing to go, David Axelrod, the president's principal political advisor, said this week he and the president would advocate amending the First Amendment for the first time in 235 years to give the government the ability to pick winners and losers in the marketplace of ideas. That's a truly radical suggestion, an absolutely radical suggestion. When it comes to free speech, these people are dangerous. Of course, the best thing to do in the meantime is to defeat them in November, but it's an important principle. By the way, you'd be pleased to know, or maybe surprised to know, that the biggest ally I've had over the years in this political speech debate has been the ACLU.
Right. There's a legislative proposal floating around that goes by the name of the Disclose Act.
Right.
Most people hear disclosure and they say, oh, that sounds good. That's giving me more information. Things are being disclosed to me that might be useful. But you see this act differently. What's your beef?
Well, one thing that's interesting about the Disclose Act, it exempts the unions. So once again, the Democrats would like to pick winners and losers, quiet the voices of those that.
And this is also a bill the ACLU opposes.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I'm in favor of disclosure, and we already have disclosure. If you contribute to a candidate or you contribute to a political party, it's already fully disclosed. In fact, there are even limits on how much you can give to a candidate and to a political party. That's not what this issue is about. We're talking about outside groups who organize for the purpose of expressing themselves in the marketplace of ideas. Frequently, that does involve expressing themselves about how a candidate voted if he's an incumbent, or how a candidate would vote if he's not an incumbent. That's a whole different world. And there's no question that what they want to do is intimidate people into shutting up. And believe me, if you give that power to the government, they will do it selectively. Yeah, they'll punish their enemies and leave their friends alone. And this administration's already doing that.
Is there, this is an idea that doesn't get a lot of support, but I'm wondering what you think of it, which is that there's a good case to be made that for donor anonymity, that it's okay for somebody to be able to give to an organization without his or her name being disclosed. What do you make of that?
The Supreme Court has spoken on that. The famous 1958 case, NAACP versus Alabama. The state of Alabama was after the membership list and the donor list of the NAACP. And the court said you can't do that. Because it was pretty obvious the purpose of trying to get the donor list and the membership list of the NAACP. The state of Alabama had no need to get that. So the court's already spoken on this issue. Justice Thomas had a strong kind of concurring dissent in Citizens United about the dangers of requiring disclosure of outside groups, opening up citizens to harassment and intimidation. And I'll be talking about that today at AEI in a broader speech. Most of the editorial pages have been hostile to me over the years and are hostile on this issue. Every editorial page not run by Policy Go has been generally critical. But, you know, they have an interesting view that the First Amendment is only for them. And one of the things that Citizens United did, quite correctly in my view, it wasn't as broad a ruling as people on the left think it was. It dealt only with corporate speech, and basically what it said was, no longer do corporations that own newspapers and television stations have an exclusive right to free speech. All corporations do. So all it did was level the playing field so that you no longer had preferred speech for some and no speech for others. Wealthy individuals have always been able to be involved. Anybody remember George Soros? Deeply involved in the 04 campaign and the 08 campaign, giving huge amounts of money. I don't recall the outrage on the left during that period. Maybe it happened, but I somehow don't remember it.
Final question for you. If and has to do with campaign finance, which is now an exceedingly complex system that has been tweaked and modified over time. If you could junk the system and have the campaign finance system that you think would be most appropriate for a country like ours, what would it look like?
Well, it's getting better, frankly. I mean, it is complicated, but it's getting better. I mean, there are no limits on what candidates can spend. There is a limit on what you can give them, and it's fully disclosed. There's no limit on what parties can spend, by and large. That's a good thing. But one could argue that there
are limits on what can be given to parties, though.
A limit on the contribution, but no limit on what the candidate may spend. In other words, you can collect as many contributions as you can. You can make an argument that candidates and parties would be even better funded if there were no limits on the contribution. That's probably a bridge too far. I wouldn't be troubled by it. Over 20 states have no limits on contributions at all. In Virginia, yeah, you can contribute any amount you want to any party. Even corporations and unions can contribute directly to candidates. I don't recall seeing that Virginia was awash in a sea of corruption. I'm unaware of such a history as a result of that. What you need to do really on this issue is step back from it and understand what the game is. People who believe the government ought to be all-powerful in the economy also believe the government ought to be empowered to dole out speech. Their ultimate goal would be to have the taxpayers themselves pay for elections. And then the private sector wouldn't be involved in elections at all. It would minimize from the left's point of view, it would minimize these sort of tainting interactions we have with the private sector. Their whole notion is that the private sector is a kind of unfortunate development that tries to get us to do the wrong thing. And that really we need to purify politics from these private influences and just take tax money and pay for our campaigns. That, of course, guarantees that we will have even less interaction with our constituents and be even more inclined to grow the government itself, because the government will control how we even get into office. All of that is quite dangerous. This is a very radical group in the White House and at the Obama campaign. I hope the American people will end this experiment this November.
Okay. Senator McConnell, thank you for taking time
Thank
to
you.
talk to us. Appreciate it.